A millionaire marries a simple woman out of interest, but what he discovers on their honeymoon leaves him shocked. Before the story begins, write in the comments which city you're watching from and tell us if you believe in true love. Good story, everyone. Liam Hayes had always been a man of precision. His life was a meticulously calculated equation where every decision was a variable leading to one inevitable outcome: success. At 35, he was a billionaire, a titan of industry, and a man who commanded respect or fear wherever he went. His sharp suits, icy blue eyes, and a demeanor colder than a winter storm had earned him a reputation as ruthless, both in business and in life. But today, for the first time in years, Liam felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time: uncertainty. It all started with a letter. The envelope, thick and embossed with the Hayes family crest, had arrived that morning. Liam had recognized his late grandfather's handwriting immediately. The old man had been gone for 6 months, but his presence still loomed large over the family empire. Liam had expected the letter to be another one of his grandfather's posthumous lectures, a reminder of the Hayes legacy, the importance of tradition, the weight of responsibility. He hadn't expected this. "You have 1 year to marry," the letter read, the words stark against the crisp white paper. "If you fail to do so, the entirety of your inheritance, your shares, your properties, your fortune, will be transferred to the Hayes Foundation. This is not a request, Liam, it's a condition." Liam stared at the letter, his jaw tightening. A condition, a threat. His grandfather had always been a manipulative old man, but this was beyond even his usual games. "Marry?" Liam muttered under his breath, crumpling the letter in his fist. Ridiculous. But it wasn't ridiculous. It was binding. His lawyers had confirmed it. The will was ironclad, and there was no way around it. If Liam wanted to keep his fortune, he had to find a wife. The problem was Liam Hayes didn't do marriage, he didn't do relationships, he didn't do love. Love was a liability, a distraction, a weakness, and Liam Hayes didn't have weaknesses. "So what's the plan?" his lawyer Charles asked later that day, sitting across from Liam in the sleek minimalist office that overlooked Manhattan. "The plan," Liam said, his voice clipped, "is to find someone who understands this is a business arrangement, nothing more." Charles raised an eyebrow. "You're looking for a wife, Liam, not a business partner." "A wife is a business partner," Liam shot back. "One who signs a contract, fulfills her obligations, and walks away when the time comes. No emotions, no complications." Charles sighed, leaning back in his chair. "And where exactly do you plan to find this paragon of practicality?" Liam's lips curved into a thin smile. "Somewhere no one will look." That's how he found her. Margot Carter was a waitress at a diner on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place Liam would never set foot in under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances. She was tall, with dark hair pulled into a messy bun and eyes that seemed to see right through him. She wore a simple uniform, her hands calloused from years of hard work. But there was something about her, a quiet strength, a resilience that Liam couldn't quite place. When he approached her with his offer, she didn't react the way he expected. "Let me get this straight," she said, crossing her arms over her chest. "You want to marry me, for 3 months. And in exchange, you'll pay off my debts and give me enough money to start over." "That's correct," Liam said, his tone businesslike. Margot laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You think you can just buy people, don't you?" Liam's jaw tightened. "This isn't about buying anyone. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement." "Right," Margot said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Because marrying a stranger for money is every girl's dream." She turned to walk away, but Liam's next words stopped her in her tracks. "What if I told you this could change your life?" Margot hesitated, her back still to him. Liam could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands clenched into fists. "Think about it," he said, his voice softer now. "You'll never have to worry about money again. You'll have a fresh start. All you have to do is say yes." For a long moment, Margot didn't move. Then, slowly, she turned to face him. "I'll think about it," she said, but Liam already knew her answer. The wedding was a quiet affair, held in a small chapel on the outskirts of the city. There were no guests, no flowers, no music, just Liam, Margot, and a priest who looked as though he'd rather be anywhere else. Liam stood at the altar, His hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. He wore a tailored black suit, his tie perfectly knotted, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. He looked every bit the billionaire he was, cold, composed, and utterly detached. Margot, on the other hand, looked out of place. She wore a simple white dress she'd bought off the rack, her hair pulled back into a loose braid. She hadn't bothered with makeup, and her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a small bouquet of wildflowers. When she reached the altar, Liam didn't smile. He didn't take her hand or offer her any words of reassurance. He simply nodded at the priest, signaling for him to begin. The ceremony was brief, the words hollow. Liam repeated his vows in a monotone voice, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond Margot's shoulder. Margot's voice, by contrast, was soft but steady, her gaze never leaving Liam's face. When it was over, Liam didn't kiss her. He didn't even look at her. He simply turned and walked out of the chapel, leaving Margot to follow behind. The reception, if it could even be called that, was held at Liam's penthouse. A single table had been set up in the dining room, with a catered meal that neither of them touched. They sat in silence, the air between them thick with tension. "So," Margot said finally, breaking the silence. "What now?" Liam glanced at her, his expression indifferent. "Now. We wait. 3 months, and this will all be over." Margot nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of her wineglass. "And after that? What happens to me?" "You'll get what you were promised," Liam said, his tone clipped. "The money, the fresh start, everything." Margot looked at him, her eyes searching his face for something, anything that might hint at humanity. But there was nothing. Just cold, calculated detachment. "You really don't care, do you?" she said softly. Liam's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he stood, tossing his napkin onto the table. "I have work to do," he said, turning to leave. Margot watched him go, her heart heavy. She'd known what she was getting into when she agreed to this arrangement, but somehow the reality was worse than she'd imagined. That night, Liam didn't come to bed. Margot lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. The morning after the wedding, Liam woke early. He hadn't slept much, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't quite place. He told himself it was just the stress of the situation, the weight of the charade he was now forced to maintain. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. Margot was still asleep when he left the bedroom, her dark hair spilling across the pillow, her face peaceful in a way that made Liam feel strangely uneasy. He shook off the feeling, heading to the kitchen to make coffee. He was halfway through his first cup when his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but Liam answered anyway, his voice sharp. "Liam Hayes." "Mr. Hayes, this is Jonathan Hartley. I'm an attorney with Hartley and Associates. I need to speak with you regarding your wife, Margot Carter." Liam frowned, setting his coffee cup down. "What about her?" "It's a sensitive matter," Hartley said. "I'd prefer to discuss it in person. Can you come to my office this morning?" Liam hesitated, his curiosity piqued. "Fine. Send me the address." An hour later, Liam was seated in a small nondescript office, facing a man who looked more like a college professor than a lawyer. Hartley was in his 50s, with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses, but his eyes were sharp, his demeanor serious. "What's this about?" Liam asked, cutting straight to the point. Hartley leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Mr. Hayes, I represent a client who has a vested interest in Margot Carter, specifically in ensuring that her past remains buried." Liam's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" Hartley sighed, pulling a file from his desk drawer and sliding it across the table. "Margot Carter is not who she claims to be. Her real name is Margaret Collins. She comes from a wealthy family, but she disappeared 5 years ago after a scandal." Liam opened the file, his eyes scanning the documents inside. There were photos of Margot, or Margaret, looking younger, happier, dressed in designer clothes and attending high society events. There were newspaper clippings, too, detailing the scandal that had driven her into hiding. "She was engaged to a man named Daniel Whitaker," Hartley continued, "the son of a prominent senator. But shortly before the wedding, it came out that Daniel was involved in illegal activities, money laundering, bribery, you name it. Margot, Margaret, was implicated by association. The media crucified her, and she vanished shortly after. Liam closed the file, his mind racing. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," Hartley said, his tone grave, "if her past comes to light, it could ruin her, and you, by extension. My client wants to ensure that doesn't happen." Liam leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "And who exactly is your client?" Hartley smiled thinly. "That's confidential. Suffice it to say, they have Margot's best interests at heart." Liam stood, tucking the file under his arm. "I'll take it from here." As he left the office, Liam's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Margaret had been hiding a secret far bigger than he'd imagined, but what did it mean for him, for their arrangement? When he returned to the penthouse, Margot was in the kitchen making tea. She looked up as he entered, her expression wary. "Where were you?" she asked. Liam didn't answer right away. Instead, he set the file on the counter, watching as her eyes widened in recognition. "You've been lying to me," he said, his voice low. Margot's face paled, her hands trembling as she reached for the file. "Where did you get this?" "That doesn't matter," Liam said, his tone hardening. "What matters is that you've been hiding something. Something big." Margot looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. "You think you know me, Liam? You don't know anything." Liam stepped closer, his gaze piercing. "Then tell me. Who are you, really?" For a long moment, Margot didn't speak. Then, slowly, she sank into a chair, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "My name is Margaret Collins," she said softly, "and I've been running from my past for 5 years." The penthouse was silent, the air thick with tension. Margot sat at the kitchen table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the file Liam had placed in front of her. She looked smaller somehow, as if the weight of her secret had physically diminished her. Liam stood across from her, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He didn't speak, didn't press her. He simply waited, his silence more unnerving than any words could have been. Finally, Margot took a deep breath and began to speak. "My family was wealthy," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Old money, the kind that comes with expectations. I was supposed to marry well, to uphold the family name, and for a while I thought I was doing everything right." She paused, her fingers tracing the edge of the file. "I met Daniel Whitaker at a charity gala. He was charming, handsome, everything my parents wanted for me. We got engaged 6 months later. It was all so perfect." Her voice broke, and she looked away, her eyes filling with tears. "But it wasn't real. None of it was real." Liam frowned, his curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" Margot took another shaky breath. "Daniel wasn't who he seemed. He was involved in illegal activities. Money laundering, bribery, things I didn't even know about until it was too late. When the authorities started investigating, they implicated me. The media had a field day. Socialite involved in scandal. Heiress caught in web of corruption. They made it sound like I was some kind of criminal mastermind." Liam's expression softened slightly, but he didn't interrupt. "I tried to defend myself," Margot continued, her voice trembling, "but no one listened. My family turned their backs on me. Daniel disappeared, leaving me to take the fall. I lost everything, my reputation, my home, my identity. So I ran. I changed my name, cut ties with everyone I knew, and started over." She looked up at Liam, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and defiance. "I didn't want this life. I didn't want to be a waitress, struggling to make ends meet. But it was better than being Margaret Collins, the woman everyone hated." Liam was silent for a long moment, processing her words. He'd expected her to have secrets, but this was something else entirely. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked finally. Margot laughed bitterly. "Tell you what? That I'm a social pariah? That marrying me could ruin your reputation? You would have walked away without a second thought." Liam's jaw tightened. "You don't know that." "Don't I?" Margot shot back, her voice rising. "You married me because it was convenient, Liam, because I was disposable. You didn't care who I was or what I'd been through. You just wanted someone who wouldn't complicate your life." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. For the first time, Liam felt a flicker of guilt. He'd been so focused on his own needs, his own agenda, that he hadn't stopped to consider what Margot might be hiding, or why. "I'm not that person anymore," Margot said, her voice softening. I don't want to be Margaret Collins. I just want to live my life without looking over my shoulder. Liam studied her, his mind racing. He'd thought he had her figured out, but now he realized he didn't know her at all. There was a strength in her, a resilience that he hadn't noticed before. "What happens now?" he asked. Margot shrugged, her shoulders slumping. "I don't know. I've spent so long running I don't even know how to stop." Liam hesitated, then reached out, placing a hand on hers. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant. "Maybe you don't have to run anymore," he said quietly. Margot looked at him, her eyes searching his face for something, anything that might give her hope. But Liam's expression was unreadable, his thoughts hidden behind a mask of indifference. For the first time, Margot wondered if she'd made a mistake in trusting him. The days that followed were tense. Liam and Margot moved around each other like strangers, the weight of her secret hanging heavy between them. Liam found himself watching her more closely, noticing things he hadn't before. The way she bit her lip when she was deep in thought, the way her eyes lit up when she laughed, something she rarely did. He tried to convince himself that his growing curiosity was just that, curiosity. But deep down, he knew it was more. Margot wasn't the simple, uncomplicated woman he'd thought she was. She was complex, layered, and far more interesting than he'd given her credit for. One evening, Liam returned home to find Margot in the living room, curled up on the couch with a book. She looked up as he entered, her expression wary. "You're home early," she said, her tone neutral. Liam shrugged off his coat, tossing it over a chair. "I cancelled my meetings." Margot raised an eyebrow. "Since when do you cancel meetings?" "Since I realized I needed a break," Liam said, his voice sharper than he intended. Margot didn't respond, returning her attention to her book. Liam hesitated, then sat down across from her, his eyes fixed on her face. "Why do you do that?" he asked after a moment. Margot looked up, confused. "Do what?" "Pretend I'm not here," Liam said, his tone softer now. Margot sighed, setting her book aside. "What do you want me to do, Liam? We're not exactly friends." "No," Liam admitted, "but we're not enemies either." Margot studied him, her expression unreadable. "What do you want from me?" Liam hesitated, searching for the right words. "I want to understand you." Margot laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Why? So you can figure out how to use me?" Liam flinched, her words hitting harder than he cared to admit. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" Margot shot back, her eyes flashing. "You married me because it was convenient, Liam. Don't pretend this is anything more than that." Liam stood, pacing the room in frustration. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't realize how messed up this whole situation is?" Margot watched him, her expression softening slightly. "Then why are you still here?" Liam stopped, turning to face her. "Because I don't know how to walk away." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy and unspoken. Margot looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and something else, something Liam couldn't quite place. "You don't have to stay," she said quietly. This was never supposed to be real. Liam stepped closer, his gaze intense. "What if I want it to be?" Margot's breath caught, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to believe him, to trust that he meant what he said. But the walls she'd built around herself were thick, and letting them down wasn't easy. "You don't know what you're asking," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then tell me," Liam said, his tone pleading. "Help me understand." For a long moment, Margot didn't speak. Then, slowly, she stood, closing the distance between them. "You want to understand me?" she said, her eyes searching his. "Then stop treating me like a business deal. Stop pretending this is just some arrangement. If you want this to be real, then be real with me." Liam stared at her, his mind racing. He'd spent his entire life building walls, keeping people at arm's length. But Margot was different. She saw through him in a way no one else ever had. "I don't know how," he admitted, his voice raw. Margot reached out, placing a hand on his chest. "Then figure it out." For the first time, Liam felt something shift inside him. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a crack in the armor he'd spent years constructing. And for the first time, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he could let someone in. The tension between Liam and Margot didn't ease overnight. If anything, it grew thicker, more palpable. They were two people standing on the edge of something neither of them fully understood, afraid to take the next step. Margot spent her days wandering the penthouse, trying to make sense of her feelings. She'd come into this arrangement with no expectations, determined to keep her heart guarded. But Liam's words, his admission that he didn't know how to walk away, had shaken her. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that this could be real, that they could be real. But the fear of getting hurt again was paralyzing. One afternoon, Margot found herself in the kitchen, staring out the window at the city below. The sky was overcast, the clouds heavy with the promise of rain. It felt like a reflection of her mood, grey, uncertain, on the verge of breaking. Liam found her there, his presence announced by the soft click of the door. He didn't speak at first, just stood beside her, his hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the same view. "You've been quiet," he said finally, breaking the silence. Margot shrugged, not looking at him. "I have a lot on my mind." Liam hesitated, then turned to face her. "Talk to me." Margot laughed, a soft, bitter sound. "What do you want me to say, Liam? That I'm confused? That I don't know what to do because I don't? This wasn't supposed to be complicated." "It doesn't have to be," Liam said, his voice low. "We can make this whatever we want it to be." Margot turned to him, her eyes filled with a mixture of frustration and sadness. "Can we? Because it feels like we're just pretending, like we're playing roles in a story that doesn't belong to us." Liam's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He knew she was right. They'd started this as a business arrangement, a transaction with clear terms and conditions. But somewhere along the way, the lines had blurred, and now neither of them knew where they stood. "What do you want, Margot?" Liam asked, his tone softer now. Margot looked at him, her heart aching. "I want to believe that this could be real, that you could see me as more than just a contract. But I don't know if that's possible." Liam stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "What if it is? What if we stopped pretending and just let this be real?" Margot's breath caught, her chest tightening. She wanted to say yes, to let herself believe that they could have something genuine. But the fear of getting hurt again was too much. "I can't," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I can't do this, Liam. Not if it's just another game to you." Liam reached out, his hand brushing against hers. "It's not a game. Not anymore." Margot pulled away, her eyes filling with tears. "You don't get it. I've spent my whole life running from people who wanted to use me. I can't do that again. I won't." Liam's expression softened, his heart aching at the pain in her voice. "I'm not them, Margot. I'm not going to hurt you." Margot shook her head, her tears spilling over. "You already have." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and unspoken. Liam felt a pang of guilt, realizing how much he'd taken her for granted. He'd been so focused on his own needs, his own agenda, that he hadn't stopped to consider how this arrangement might affect her. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice raw. "I didn't mean to hurt you." Margot wiped her tears, her resolve hardening. "It doesn't matter. This was never supposed to be real, and now it's over." Liam's heart sank, a sense of loss washing over him. "Margot!" "No," she interrupted, her voice firm. "I'm done, Liam. I can't keep pretending. I'll stay until the 3 months are up, but after that, I'm leaving." Liam stared at her, his mind racing. He wanted to argue, to convince her to stay, but he knew he'd lost that right. For the first time in his life, Liam Hayes didn't know what to do. The final days of the 3-month arrangement passed in a blur. Liam and Margot moved around each other like ghosts, their interactions polite but distant. The penthouse, once a symbol of Liam's success, now felt like a prison, cold, empty and suffocating. Liam tried to focus on work, throwing himself into meetings and deals, but his mind kept drifting back to Margot. He replayed their conversations, her words echoing in his head like a haunting melody. "I can't keep pretending, I'm leaving." The thought of her walking out of his life for good filled him with a sense of dread he couldn't shake. He'd spent his entire life building walls, keeping people at arm's length. But Margot had broken through those walls, and now he didn't know how to live without her. On the last day of the arrangement, Liam returned home early, his heart heavy with anticipation. He found Margot in the living room, her suitcase packed and sitting by the door. She looked up as he entered, her expression unreadable. "I was just about to leave." Liam's chest tightened, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Do you have to go right now?" Margot nodded, her eyes avoiding his. "There's nothing left to say, Liam. We both knew this was coming." Liam stepped closer, his voice softening. "What if I don't want it to end?" Margot looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "It was never real, Liam. You said it yourself. This was just an arrangement." "It started that way," Liam admitted. "But it's not just an arrangement anymore. Not for me." Margot's breath caught, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to believe him, to trust that he meant what he said, but the fear of getting hurt again was too much. "You don't mean that," she said, her voice trembling. "I do," Liam said, his tone earnest. "I've spent my whole life chasing success, building an empire, but none of that matters if I don't have someone to share it with. I don't want to lose you, Margot." Margot's eyes filled with tears, her resolve wavering. "You don't know what you're asking." "Then let me show you," Liam said, stepping closer. "Let me prove that this can be real." For a long moment, Margot didn't speak. She looked at Liam, her heart torn between fear and hope. She wanted to believe him, to trust that they could have something genuine. But the scars of her past ran deep, and letting them go wasn't easy. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Liam reached out, taking her hand in his. "So am I. But I'm willing to try if you are." Margot looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any hint of doubt. But all she saw was sincerity, a vulnerability she hadn't seen in him before. "What if it doesn't work?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Then we'll figure it out," Liam said, his tone firm. "But I'm not giving up on us, not without a fight." Margot's tears spilled over, her heart aching with a mixture of fear and hope. She wanted to believe him, to trust that they could have something real. But more than that, she wanted to believe in herself, in her ability to love and be loved. "Okay," she said softly, her voice barely audible. Liam's heart soared, a sense of relief washing over him. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as if afraid she might disappear. "I'm not letting you go," he whispered, his voice filled with determination. Margot buried her face in his chest, her tears soaking into his shirt. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace, a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could have something real. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, Liam reached into his pocket and pulled out the contract, the one that had started it all. Without a word, he tore it in half, letting the pieces fall to the floor. Margot looked up at him, her eyes wide with surprise. "What are you doing?" Liam smiled, his heart full, making it real. "What would you do in Margot's place? Do you think Liam has really changed? Leave your opinion in the comments. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score do you give this thrilling ending? Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any of our stories, full of suspense and twists. Enjoy more stories like this by clicking here on the final screen.